Welcome to the UIAAA Connection podcast. Hometown Ticketing is proud to be the exclusive sponsor of the UIAAA Connection podcast and to provide schools nationwide with the best options for digital ticketing for their events. Visit their website at hometownticketing.com to learn how they can make digital ticketing possible and simple at your school. Thank you to Hometown Ticketing for their exclusive sponsorship of the UIAAA Connection podcast.
Welcome to another edition of the UIAAA Connection. I'm your host, Mark Hutch-Hunter. Today we have as our special guest, Tom Sherwood, principal of Brighton High School. Welcome to the podcast, Tommy.
Happy to be here.
Let me also mention that Tom Sherwood is when I say the first principal, we've had a couple of superintendents that have been principals before, but this is the first sitting principal we've had on the podcast. So You're in rarefied air. So let's have you begin, Tom, by sharing where you grew up, where you went to college, your first job, etc.
So I grew up right on the border of Riverton and Bluffdale. At the time when I was growing up there, it was a pretty rural area. Everybody still knew everybody. I attended Bingham High School, graduated from Bingham in 1989. Out of high school, I bounced around a bit in my educational path. I went to Dixie College right out of high school, served an LDS mission to Brazil, came home, went to the U, ran out of money, went back down to Dixie, finished my associates, went back to the U, and then decided to go into education and went down and finished my degree in biology education at Southern Utah University with a chemistry minor. Later went back to get my master's degree at the University of Utah in 2001. So first jobs, do you mean like education jobs or jobs?
Let's do both.
Well, my earliest job I remember is laying sewer pipe for my uncle's construction company when I was 13. Don't know that was OSHA compliant, but it was the 80s. So raised on a farm, just did whatever was necessary. Learned how to work hard for my family and relatives. First job in education was teaching chemistry at Snow Canyon High School in St. George, Utah. Taught there for a year. And then wife decided, since we'd just had our first son, that she wanted to be closer to family. So we moved up to Salt Lake, and I taught for a year at Bingham High School, my alma mater. And then I was transferred over to Brighton High School, taught there for 4.5 years. So I was a classroom teacher for 6.5 years, and then I entered into administration. I've been in administration for the last 21 years. So
interesting story that you'll appreciate, Tommy. I have a master's degree, went through college, went through high school. Never, ever have I taken a chemistry class. Not one.
Oh, yeah. I can't say that, it's definitely, it's nice to know, but it's definitely not a requirement. So.
Yeah, well, it's somehow I got out of, I don't know how I filled my science requirement in high school, but I didn't have the chemistry. So let's talk for a minute about your participation in youth sports out in the Riverton, Bluffdale area.
I, at the time, you know this, everybody played outside all day long. Our summers were filled with neighborhood basketball games. Anybody that could come would play. We played tackle football. We played pickup baseball, a lot of hot box. Just anytime we could pick up a ball and play, we'd pick up a ball and play. And when I got old enough to play organized sports, I played everything I could. I played county or rec league baseball, rec league basketball, youth conference football. I really enjoyed my time playing youth sports. I was actually an early bloomer. When I was 12, 13, I was on a AAU basketball team that we were actually a really good basketball team. I was on there with Kenneth Roberts and a couple of the Tebbs boys, and we won the state AAU that year as a 13-year-old AAU program. But I played center, and at the time I was 6 foot tall and 220 pounds for a 13-year-old was a pretty dominant center.
Yeah.
Didn't translate well to the high school game. They weren't looking for 6 foot centers at Bingham High. So in my youth, I was a pretty competitive basketball player. In high school, I only played football. Enjoyed my time in high school sports, 2-year varsity starter, actually had an opportunity to play post high school sports, but decided not to. I had a scholarship offer to Dixie College, but didn't work out. I was going on a mission and they wanted me to redshirt. We just decided to part ways. So, but had a great experience in high school athletics.
So you're telling me that the dominant 6 foot 200 pound center in the 6th grade doesn't compute to the 6 foot 200 pound center in the 9th grade?
No,
or
it does
10th
not.
grade.
Does not. In fact, for as challenging as it was, looking back, I respect the conversation, but the freshman basketball coach cut me. I was a very good freshman basketball player. In fact, I think I probably had the most impressive tryout. I think I led tryouts. I had the most rebounds. I think I had the most points. Played very well. Just assumed I was going to be on the freshman basketball team, and he pulled me aside, and I'll never forget. He said, "Hey, Tommy, how long you been shaving?" As a freshman in high school. And I said, "I don't know, a couple of years." And he said, "You're not getting any bigger, right?" And I said, "Well, yeah, probably not." And he says, "You're a really good freshman basketball player, but we're trying to build a varsity program here. So I'm gonna cut you to try to keep some kids that we think might develop into some taller prospects later in life." And it was a tough lesson at the time for a 14-year-old, 15-year-old kid, but I respected that he had the conversation with me. So
yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Let's have you share with our audience now some of the mentors you've had in your life that made a big difference in your educational path.
Yeah, that's a good question. I had some really good high school teachers that I think impacted me, and at least kind of got me on the idea of being being involved in education. Scott Crump was a Bingham fixture. He was a great classroom teacher. Doug Richards was my math teacher, outstanding math teacher. One of my good friends' father, his name was Paul Kochever, and he was an administrator in Jordan District for a lot of years, and had the opportunity to talk to him a little bit about what he did for a living, and it sounded like an interesting gig. So my father, of course, was a big mentor in my life. I was every bit a Gen X kid. They didn't put up with a lot of crap back then. You got pretty short leash.
Yeah.
But he taught me how to work hard, taught me the importance of honesty, integrity, and it's really carried me a lot. I've worked with some great educators in my career. I've worked for a lot of principals that I learned from in my career. I worked for Robert Sproul here at Brighton High School, and he and I don't have a ton in common necessarily, but I definitely learned from him. I've learned from people in this district. I've known Bob Dowdle, who's retiring this year, for 20 years, and again, he and I don't necessarily have the same leadership style, but I've definitely learned a ton from him over the past 20 years. So, I think you got to take the good and the bad in everybody that you work with and learn from it. But I tell you what, there's no shortage of fantastic people in education. It's one of the things I like most about my job is the people I get to work with on the day-to-day. They're just for the most part, just really high quality individuals.
Very good. Let me ask you this. I know you've talked about the cut from the freshman team, but let's not count that. Let's say, what's your biggest failure or disappointment in life, and what did you learn from it?
Yeah, that wouldn't be my biggest. That was pretty small potatoes. That's a great question. you know, I've failed a lot, but I've succeeded a lot as well. I think, you know, I would say over the past few years, there've been a few jobs I've been interested in and applied for and didn't get. Um, and I'm not going to be too specific about that, but you
Mm-hmm.
know, you know, you think that you have everything that they're looking for, and you think that you're, you know, the best candidate, but sometimes you're not. And
Yeah.
I think you have to be humble enough to recognize what, you know, what things do I need to change or improve upon to make myself more marketable or a better fit. And you know, it's easy to stand back and say, you know, oh, you know, they don't know what the hell they're doing. You know, their loss. But I think if you really want to have you know, the right growth mindset about things, you have to always look inward and think, you know, what could I do differently? Where do I need to improve? Where do I need to work harder? Um, and I think use those failures as an opportunity to inspire growth. So
Very well said. I'm interested in this next answer. I want to know what it is that makes a teacher that's been in it for 6 years at three different high schools, and all of a sudden you decide you want to become one of them and go into administration.
you know, I don't know if this is common, but I actually got into it with administration as my goal all along.
Okay.
Uh, in fact, that same uncle that I laid sewer pipe and water line for, when he asked me what I wanted to be, I said I want to be a high school principal, and that was probably in my early 20s, working for him at that point. And um, this is my 15th year being a high school principal, and this was actually the end game. I don't know what it was I thought was going to be exciting about it, but at a very young age, I decided that was the path I wanted to take. And so as far as that goes, you know, mission accomplished. But it's definitely not an easy job. It's changed in the 15 years that I've been doing it, and I still enjoy it. It's still very satisfying, very rewarding, but it's definitely full of daily challenges as well. So
Let me ask you a follow-up. You mentioned just a moment ago that the job has changed since you first got it 15 years ago. So share with our audience some of the things that are different about being a principal now than 15 years ago. And don't go to COVID, because that's a whole
no, that's a whole
separate
different
thing.
volume. Yeah. Well, I think, you know, when I started, principals were expected to be effective managers. You know, they were expected to, you know, hire teachers, fire teachers when necessary, manage the budgets, you know, hire coaches, manage an athletic program. And you know, that was kind of the main part of their job. And that's still the main part of my job. But in the last, I would say, decade, they just added things to that. You know, now we're expected to be curricular leaders as well. I'm supposed to know the best ways to teach math, science, social studies. I'm supposed to help teachers develop their, you know, pedagogy and to become better educators. I'm supposed to know what it is they need to do to improve. Social media and email has made us accessible by anyone. You
Yeah.
know, it used to be people had to call my secretary to make an appointment with me, or you know, or call me personally. And now I get 100 emails a day, and the amount of time I spend responding to directly to public about those emails it has grown so much. You know, there is no hierarchy anymore. Everybody has direct access to the principal all the time, and it really has made it very, very difficult to manage our time. You know, they didn't take anything off of our plates, as the demands on our time have changed. And I would say average high school principals in the state of Utah probably work between 60 and 75 hours a week, and that's normal. On a busy week, it gets worse. So it really is a high time demand job. So
Absolutely. And so another follow-up would be, now I realize that you've never been an athletic director per se. I know you've worked with different ones, myself being one of
Yeah.
them. So go back 20 years to when you first got to be an assistant principal and you began working with, it was me back then, but other ADs. So you talked about how the job of principal is different. So how is the job of an AD different in the past 20 years from your perspective?
Oh, I mean, I keep tabs on that pretty well. And it's changed substantially. Back in the day, the AD was just there to kind of set up the chairs and the scores table and to make sure we had people there to keep score or to run the scoreboard or to make sure we got the officials' names so we could get them paid. It wasn't nearly the job it is today. With a lot of recent legislation and pressure put upon the Board of Education, the amount of checks and balances that we put into place on all of our coaches has become a full-time job for somebody at a large comprehensive high school to make sure that every individual you're putting on the field or on the court with kids has all their certifications, all their training, their concussion, their first aid, their background checks, and it's gotten to the point where you can't miss. If you happen to be the athletic
Yes.
director that lets somebody out there with a kid who has a background or who didn't do his concussion training, and then something happens, that you're the first person they're going to come to and say, hey, what happened? The expectations, the demands of the job, and the repercussions for not doing your job have increased significantly over the past few years.
No, I would agree with that. I like in the high school setting the principal is basically the owner of the team and the AD is basically the general manager. And
it's
go
become,
ahead.
I'm expecting a lot more of my ADs than I did 20 years ago. It's a full-time job now. I don't expect them to teach. I expect them to do their athletic director duties all day. And it keeps them busy all day.
No question.
Yeah.
So I would say that the two people in the building that put in the most hours every week are going to be the principal and the AD. So thank you for that. So since we're on the topic, let's talk about your perspective, a couple of ideas that what principals can do to help their AD be better and what ADs can do to help their principal be better.
So there are a lot of principals who really don't know everything required of the athletic directors nowadays.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
With Register My Athlete and all of the ins and outs of what's required of them, and especially if you're at a large high school that plays all of the sports, the amount of time it takes to keep that all straight is significant. I think there's a lot of athletic directors that probably would benefit from sitting down with their principal, reviewing Register My Athlete with them, talking to them about the size of job that is and the amount of time it takes. I feel like there are a lot of principals who don't have any idea what that end looks like. And I think from the principal side, the thing that I try to spend time with on my athletic directors is helping them understand the politics of high school athletics.
Yes.
It's as challenging as it's ever been. You have all these competing forces. You have the district, you have parents, you have other players, you have coaches, you have administrators, and all those pressures are coming, to bear typically on the principal and the athletic director, and they have to manage all those competing demands, and it can be very stressful. And I think helping them understand, having them sit in on conversations with parents and helping them navigate some of those critical conversations to help them develop those skills so they can have some of those conversations for you, take some of those things off your plate once you get them to a point where you trust that they can have those conversations. That's not something that a lot of athletic directors come prepared to do, is have some of those challenging conversations with parents. But I feel like it is a role they can help you fill if you can train them to where they can get to that point.
Yeah.
I also think that they need to understand that they are, I mean, sure, I have 4 assistant principals, but my athletic director is a lot more present with my coaches. They're my eyes and ears. And I expect them to be honest with me and give me honest feedback about what's going on in my programs. What's the culture like? What's going on at practice? Are the kids happy? Is everybody being treated well? Yeah, I think it's important that the IED understands their role is that, coaches are important and we all need to keep them and respect them and make sure that we have good people in the building. But, our first priority is to kids and make sure that the kids are having a good experience, that we're doing right by them, that they're safe, social, emotionally and physically. And if there's, things that need to be addressed as a school to address those, the AD is your first eyes and ears to help with that. So you need to make sure that there's a high level of trust there.
Absolutely. Let me follow up, and I'm hoping that you agree with this because it's been my mantra for the 30 years I was at Jordan, and maybe it's not fair for me to bring this to you because obviously I worked for you for a good percentage of the time and then worked with you as the assistant principal. But it's not my motto, but I've always said that a good AD is worth their weight in gold, and a bad one is an albatross around the principal's neck.
Yeah. No, a
And
good AD can make all the difference. It really can. High school athletics, it's such a big part of what high school principals do. Not to be cliche, but if I had parents calling me as much about, math as I did about sports, I think maybe we'd have a little bit better success with math. But I would say it's more than 50% of the time I spend in a given week. It will be with high school athletics. And if you have a good AD, it can really help minimize that to some extent.
Sure. So I know this isn't on the list of questions that I sent you. So from your perspective, obviously we're not going to name names or schools because I worked for you and I thought we had a great relationship and I let you know what was going on. But do you think more principals have come over to your side lately? And I realize I've been out of it 9 years. Or do you think there's some principals that still haven't really grasped the fact that their AD can make their life a whole lot easier? What's your perspective on that?
Oh, that's a tough question. It varies from district to district and how much each district or school leans on their athletic director and gives them, kind of purview over. And I think some of that depends on the principal and who you can get to be your AD. There's a lot of variables, but I think principals who, I know that a lot of principals who have turned their entire athletic program over to an assistant principal, if they feel that assistant principal is more suited to manage those types of affairs than the principal. And in many cases, that principal kind of functions as a co-AD and them and the AD work together. In that case, I think the AD's influence is a little more limited. I think that because of the politics I shared, some principals are hesitant to give their ADs too much of the responsibilities for fear that, it's out of their control a little bit. But I do think that if principals could really buy into the value of training your ADs well and being clear with your expectations and helping them to understand what you value as a principal and making sure that they are acting according to your, vision, that they could be a real asset to you in your building if you would let them. So it's just a matter of taking the time to build that relationship and trust and allowing them to take over the reins for some of those things. But it's hard to say to what extent that's done statewide. I know principals that rely on their ADs 100%. I know others who don't. But as far as to what extent, it's hard to say.
Sure. Let's talk for a moment about your time. You've had the unique opportunity, let's say, I bet you've been on the executive committee probably 12, 14 years now?
something like that. So I think
that's a good amount of time. And I think that obviously helps you in your perspective on high school athletics and in dealing with your AD. But talk about your time spent on the executive committee of the UHSAA and what a blessing that is.
So I first got into it because I thought it would be interesting. And it was. And the first thing, I came to realize, and this is something we say all the time, but I don't know if people really get it. Principals all the time complain about the UHSAA. I don't know what the hell the UHSAA thinks they're doing,
Principals and coaches.
Principals and coaches, and they don't realize really that, and this sounds cliche, but it is the truth, that we are the UHSAA, that there are systems in place that if you don't like the way something is, there's a way to change it. And there really are good systems in place to address, concerns if you have them. And they're never going to make everybody happy. There's, I think, we're going on 140 plus member schools, I think, at this point. And you're never gonna. It's really difficult in a state this size with 6 classifications, with the needs of urban, suburban, and rural schools to have a system that works for everybody. But they really do try. It's a very open environment. People have an opportunity to have a voice. We listen to coaches. We listen to principals. Everybody that wants a seat at the table has a seat at the table. It's just a matter of being willing to take the time to get involved and to listen and to compromise. Some people think that if they take something to the UHSA and they don't get their way, that the UHSA is broken. Well, maybe they don't know as much as they think they know. So that's hard to say, but there is a good system, and I feel like the executive committee working in tandem with the board of trustees. I mean, it's not perfect, but it's a pretty solid arrangement. So, people who question what goes on there, my encouragement would be for them to get involved. That really has made all the difference. It's good people that are trying their best all the time.
Great comment. Do you have any humorous stories that come to mind in the 14 years that you've been there?
Well, I don't know. There's been there have been plenty of funny things. I think the ones that I'd probably think are the funniest are probably a little sensitive. I've sat in on a lot of ejection hearings.
Oh yes,
and it's always interesting. It's always interesting to hear some coach's perspective on why they got ejected. And that there's still coaches out there that think it's a tactic. I'm gonna behave so poorly that I'm gonna get ejected, so my team will know that I love and support them. I really don't think that's the tactics we should be using in our current environment.
That's funny.
I think there's probably better tactics. So
well, they say that, and I know I've said on a couple of hearings with you, but yeah, I got ejected, so my team knows I love them. Yeah. They know you love them for the game that you're not going to be coaching them next time.
Yeah, just
or the varsity coach, the varsity basketball coach is sitting at the end of the sophomore bench and gets ejected. Yeah. And I say, Coach, you think that's okay to get ejected in a sophomore game? And it's kind of then when they don't have an answer to you that.
Yeah, no, it's and I think and I'm glad you brought that up. I think something else that we need to realize is that more than ever, our cultures are really dictating the future of high school sports in Utah. I don't think people realize we have half the officials we did a decade ago.
Right.
Most of these
absolutely.
And the biggest reason for that decline is poor behavior at games, and it's not the kids. I'll be the first to admit that kids can get unruly from time to time, but we have things to do to deal with the kids. It's the parents that are the challenge at a lot of these sporting events, and I can't tell you how many times I've gone to a parent and say, hey, you can't talk to an official like that, and they've basically said, no, I can't. It's my God-given right. If they're going to be an official, they signed up to get yelled at, and I don't know how we can change that mindset.
And you tell them
that isn't what they signed up for.
You say it's your God-given right to escort them out of the game since you're
exactly
the one that issued the ticket.
Yeah. So
That's great. Okay, the burning question, at least to me, I'm not sure for the rest of our nation or the rest of our audience across the nation, is when exactly is it do we get to call you Dr. Tom?
Well, it's definitely been a long process. You'll be happy to know I've applied for graduation in April.
Oh, I like it.
Yeah, so I should walk in April. I should defend sometime this spring. So the horizon, the end is on the horizon.
So when you attend the UIAAA conference in April, will it be premature to call you Dr. Tom, or will we have to wait for another week?
Probably a couple weeks premature. So
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, Tommy. Share with our audience what's the favorite part of your job.
It's it's the kids. You know, as much as people talk about, you know, kids nowadays are different. Sure, in some ways they are, but they're really not. They're still just kids. They're still really fun to be around. By and large, there's so much goodness in them. They really are here to learn. They're here to grow. They're here to make connections with adults that care about them, and to be a part of their lives in a meaningful way during these formative teen years when they're in high school has just been such a privilege, and it continues to be. They're not that much different than they've ever been, and it's what's made, you know, my job worth doing. Every day is full of challenges. You know, I bet I've had 2 phone calls today where the person on the other end was not too happy. But you know, those things you navigate and you work through them and you problem solve. But you know, you keep coming back because you go walk the halls and talk to kids and you know, interact, and it makes it worthwhile. So.
Very good. Thanks for sharing that. Let's finish up with a couple of questions, Tommy. The first being, you have 2 suggestions for a brand new athletic director, and they need to follow Tommy's suggestions in order to be successful. What would those 2 suggestions be?
So the first would be to build positive, appropriate relationships with the athletes in your building. They need to know that you're a safe place that they can come if they need, you know, if they need to talk to somebody. They need to know you care about them. You know, I love to see, you know, I mean, you get this, Hutch. I've seen you get this.
Yeah.
I've seen Lynn get this. You know, 35-year-old woman in the supermarket comes up to him and you know, hugs him, and you know,
Yeah.
and you just know that they had a great relationship when they had that AD student relationship together. And I emphasize appropriate, you know, and I think that's really important, that the AD knows the athletes enough to know what's going on and help manage their experience in a positive way. And the second thing would be get to know your coaches, get to know their character, get to know, you know, what they're about, get to know their coaching style, and make sure that you're putting good people with kids. You know, it's hard for a principal to see all the things that are going on in the building. It's easy to sometimes let friendships get in the way of making good, sound decisions. But I would say get to know your coaches well. Know what kind of character they have. Make sure they're good for kids. And so that would be the 2 things are both related to relationships. Get good relationship with the kids and get good relationships with your coaches.
Well said. Thanks for sharing that. The last question is, soon to be Dr. Tom, what questions should I have asked you that I failed to ask you?
Oh boy. That's a hard one. I think you've asked me some good questions. Maybe what is the most challenging aspect of my job?
All right, then what is the most challenging aspect of your job in 2023?
It is managing all of the forces that are constantly at the door of public education. You know, I have the expectations from my school district and my school board. I have expectations from my parents. I have expectations from my teachers, the students, legislature. Everybody has a different agenda on what they think schools should be and how they think they should be run. And I think that principals across the state and across the country are really putting them in the middle of that. And it's becoming unmanageable. I think there was a time when people had, some trust in schools, some trust in principals. And I feel like that's waning a bit. I still think there's a lot of people who trust their local schools and trust their principals, but there's a lot of people with agendas out there on every side of the issue, and principals are stuck in the middle, and it's becoming very difficult for them to navigate everybody's agendas. So that's the most challenging part.
That's well said. On that note, that wraps up this edition of the UIAAA Connection. Again, our guest today has been Tom Sherwood, principal, Brighton High School. Thanks, Tommy, for being on the show today.
Thanks, Chuck. Appreciate it.
For our listeners, we hope you tune in again next week for another edition of the UIAAA Connection.